Stop the world!
Welcome to Stop the World, the ASPI podcast. I'm Olivia Nelson.
And I'm David Wroe.
And today we're staying in-house with a discussion between you, Dave, and our Executive Director, Justin Bassi.
Indeed, Liv. It's a kind of more professional version of the conversations we have when we're going to fetch coffee in the morning. But we thought with so much happening this week, it was a good time to jump behind the mics. So we had Anthony Albanese's visit to China, of course, Donald Trump's belated but welcome change of heart in terms of support for Ukraine, Exercise Talisman Sabre, which Australia was hosting, the military exercise, and of course the flare-up in Syria, where we had some clashes between different factions, including government forces, which brought Israel in and caused it to launch strikes against various targets in Syria, including in the capital Damascus. So it was all happening.
I should also say it's more professional than we are dressed right now as well.
It's Friday afternoon, so yes.
But none of these issues are straightforward. There's twists and turns in every corner of the world at the moment. And as always, between you and Justin, there's also some disagreement, some agreement, and there's plenty of interesting discussion. I think, Dave, if we drew a Venn diagram, there's about 70% overlap between you, and that leaves plenty to talk about in the remaining 30%.
Yep. And the best part is that I felt I learned something and developed my own thinking along the way, which is what ASPI is here for. So I hope listeners feel the same way. Hope you enjoy the podcast. All right, Justin, it's you and me today. Friday morning, we're pumped. Welcome to Stop the World. Let's have a chat.
Thanks, Dave. Good to be with you.
We're doing this because it's been a big week, lots happening. The biggest thing in the Australian news is, of course, Anthony Albanese's trip to China. Lots of commentary about it. Do you want to just give me your headline views to start with? That might be the best place to start.
Sure. There is a lot happening. Dave, my view is that these leadership visits, very important, very good to do. Economic relationships, discussions on trade, very good to do. The issue for me is that engagement, though, can't come across as being the outcome itself. And economics in isolation can't be the outcome itself. For me, there are always opportunities in these visits. There are also risks. I think there are three specific risks that we have with this visit, like all visits. One is to avoid being used as a propaganda tool or propaganda purpose. The second is to avoid a situation where the importance of trade and the importance of the bilateral trade relationship is allowed to become a dependency, an over-dependency, and a complete disproportionate power base that forms between two countries. And the third, related to the second, is to avoid giving a perception, both to China itself, but also to the Australian public, that we are prioritising our short-term economic interests over our immediate or long-term security interests. And I do think that there are elements of all three of those risks that are at play through this visit.
Yep. Okay. So on the propaganda one, I have views on pandas, which we can come back to if you like. But the second one is the one that really jumps out at me about this visit. I mean, huge deals on the green steel, green iron, however you want to describe it, decarbonisation of steel effectively. It seems to be a huge economic opportunity, huge deal for Australia. There's the focus on tourism that Anthony Albanese's clearly made a big effort on, and his visit to the Great Wall, etc., has fed into that. But it seems to me that we have just very easily forgotten what the last 5 years or so, well, the years between, somewhere around the mid-2010s and 2022 actually looked like, and what we went through. And we are at great risk of putting ourselves back into that vulnerable position. If you'll allow me a quick anecdote, around the 2015 period, so this is well before even the really kind of darkest days of around the COVID time. I was a journalist at the time. I was speaking to a senior Australian national security and foreign affairs official who was by no means a sort of rabid China hawk. He was a pragmatic Australian national interest advocate. And I remember very distinctly, he said to me, for the first time since the 1970s, during the time of Gough Whitlam, we can no longer pursue a policy of maximum engagement with China. The behaviour that they have demonstrated means that we simply cannot continue on this path. If we look for maximum engagement, we are simply going to make ourselves increasingly vulnerable, and that is something we are actually going to have to start moving away from that. A remarkable thing for a senior Australian official to say, as a change after something like 30 years of policy, and now it feels to me as if that sort of maximalist engagement seems to be coming back. I guess a couple of questions that occur to me. One is, how much does the Trump effect actually have to do with this? I mean, that's obviously been raised, like, are we drifting back towards China's orbit because we feel that the US is so insufficiently reliable now? I'm a bit dubious about that, not least because this was already happening in the first term of the Albanese government, and that was mostly under Joe Biden, of course. So, this has been underway for a while. But also, I mean, I suppose I'm somewhat sympathetic to the government's position in the sense that it's very hard for us to take, some kind of firm China policy when it's pretty unclear to us exactly what the US China policy is under Trump. I mean, we've talked about this before, but I'd be worried about leaving ourselves swinging in the breeze by taking firm positions on China. But where does that leave us? I mean, does it mean that we just sort of drift into a position of neutrality? I suppose that's my worry at the moment.
Yeah, all very good questions. Whoever that official was 10 years ago nailed it, and was really at the beginning of the Australian shift in its China policy and security policy. I think it's too easy, Dave, to simply blame Trump. Should we, whenever we need to, disagree or hold to account an American administration if we disagree with something that they are doing or saying? Sure, absolutely. But as you said, for the first years of the current government stabilisation policy, it was under President Biden. I think we also need to counter any view that the Australian shift on China policy happened because of President Trump's first administration. There is always an undercurrent of misunderstanding around some Australian decisions, like the 5G decision. Those are examples. The 5G decision, the decision to introduce foreign interference laws, these are all decisions based on Australia's national security and national interest. Australia made its 5G decision before the Americans made a decision. So going to your point of, if there's uncertainty as to exactly what the Americans might do in some situations, well, fine, we would like some predictability in many of those situations. But that can't leave us with such a level of inertia that we simply let others decide everything for us. We have to be in a situation where we're saying what is in Australia's interests. I do think that this visit has shown that we at the moment are unable to do two things at once. Yes, we should, of course, have an economic relationship with China, but have a look at how the Europeans are managing their relationship now, a relationship that I think was problematic a few years ago, just as, of course, Europe's relationship with Russia was problematic. But Europe is absolutely comfortable. Comfortable might be the wrong word. They are clear that China is an economic partner, but also a strategic adversary. Yeah. They are both. Australia doesn't seem to be able to say that China is both an economic partner and a strategic adversary. I think we are using the fact that the Australian population has some concerns about the US and President Trump to create a moral equivalence or a false equivalence between the US and China, to allow ourselves to say that what's wrong with the world at the moment, the instability in the world, is just great power competition. That's just not right. And so how did the visit feed into that? Goes to your issue that out of my three risks, the trade dependency and the economics over security is the bigger one for you. The trade delegation that the Prime Minister took with him, significantly high wealth Australian individuals, companies, and of course on the face of it, great, take a trade delegation. Business is important. But so many of the business leaders said publicly in the public parts of their meetings with their Chinese counterparts and Chinese officials that the relationship, the Australia-China relationship, was based on trust. Well, it's just not right. It can't be right. I don't have a problem with working out where Australia should trade with China, that's safe to do so through due diligence. But we shouldn't be providing the Australian public with the view that the Australia-China relationship is based on mutual trust. One, that's the Chinese Communist Party's phrase that we seem so willing once again to be repeating back. But two, it's not even that we have to learn from other countries' mistakes and other countries' lessons. It's not like we're saying, what have we got to learn from Europe's mistakes with Russia? Or what have we got to learn with Europe's mistakes leading into World War II? We have just come out of years of economic and diplomatic coercion by China against us. There's no trust there. The reality is that those business leaders are there because of money. That's fine, but be willing to say that the economics makes profits for the companies, which helps businesses in Australia and helps jobs in Australia. Be okay saying that. Don't try and tell the Australian public that it's based on trust because it's not. And I think that tells the Chinese Communist Party, it tells Beijing the wrong message as well. It says we've got Australia where we want them because they are so fearful of what we might do again in the future that they are willing to say what is not true. And even though in many respects the trade measures that were on us for 4 or 5 years have come off, I think the lack of either the government's lack of ability or lack of willingness to describe what the true nature of the security threat is, and the business leaders being unable to say that they are just interested in profits and trying to say that there is trust, shows that we are still being coerced.
Yeah, I know. I think you've put that really quite well. I mean, one of the slight distinctions, I suppose. Well, I guess one of the challenges that I was going to put to you about that point about putting economics over security is that governments need to think about everything. I mean, like, you and I, we work in the national security space. Of course, our preoccupation is national security. And of course, we can make the argument that security is the foundation for everything else. If you don't have sovereignty and security, then it's very hard to have control over much else in your sort of national destiny. But governments have the tough job of actually having to deal with all of these things. Now, they have to calculate what the security risk is, and then decide what actions to take on that might put constraints on their economic activity. And that's, as always, like, a job that has to be reassessed day by day. But they do have to think about people's jobs. So I guess it's I would distinguish. The billionaires going on the trips, I wouldn't want to characterize it purely in terms of their sort of profit seeking, when they do create companies that create jobs, that create a standard of living for Australians, and that is actually really, really important. And by the way, that does actually flow through to government coffers ultimately,
Sure.
that can pay for our national security. Sure. Now, of course, you and I wish that some more of that money, those government coffers, were going towards national security. But to come back around to the start, I do agree, and I think you've put it rather well, that position is perfectly understandable if we are a bit more frank in that European style of saying, yes, this is an economic partnership and a huge economic opportunity for us, but it is a strategic risk for us at the same time. And we have to find a way to live with both of those
Correct.
Parallel
That's
situations.
exactly right. And why is it important? To be frank, we've got to do the due diligence that can show not just Australia today, but it's the next generation, that the Australian government, private sector, civil society was doing enough due diligence to say, yes, we want to cooperate, we want to collaborate to our benefit, but we're not willing to put at risk either human rights or our national security. To give you a couple of examples of why I think that we don't have that balance right at the moment. There's been a lot of talk about, where are those areas of cooperation? We keep hearing we cooperate where we can. So where are they, apart from just generics on trade, selling more wine, selling iron ore? One of the areas that keeps cropping up, of course, is we cooperate on climate. That's an area that Australia and China should be able to cooperate on.
Yep.
Okay, fine. It doesn't remove, though, the absolute need for Australia to still do due diligence. That, yes, of course, we want to solve climate problems, but we don't want to solve climate problems by creating either human rights or security concerns. An example being in the transition to renewables. If we look at the solar power industry, we have a situation at the moment where, in my view, because we have just lurched into, we need to do solar, we've created a situation where there is now an effective monopoly that Chinese companies have in our solar industry, so that if Australians who do care about the environment and have put solar panels on their roofs, unless they've done their own due diligence and found the very few alternatives that exist, in all likelihood, they've got Chinese-made solar panels on their roof.
Yep.
And unfortunately, many of those are made through Xinjiang by forced labour.
Sure.
We surely don't want to say we are prioritising cheaper solar panels and not caring that the supply chain is full of modern slavery. If you're driving an electric vehicle in Australia, no matter which company you have as the car, whether it's a Chinese company like BYD or an American company, Tesla, you're driving with Chinese components, and the all-important battery is Chinese. We've got to do a better job of recognising that simply saying cooperation is a good in itself is not right. And the security areas, those human rights areas, in the security area, I think that we are ticking a box rather than actually acting in our national interest, Dave. And an example being political language around, did you raise, for example, Prime Minister, the case of Dr. Young, an Australian who's been detained in China since January of 2019? And the answer was yes, I raised the case. Very good.
Yep.
It is good. But simply answering that I raised the case and being unwilling on follow-up questions to go into the case, and claiming some type of privacy when the family and Dr. Young himself isn't claiming any privacy restrictions, is a problem, because the Australian public should hear every single time when asked about Dr. Young that we didn't only raise it, but we told Beijing that Dr. Young's detention is a structural problem in the relationship, in the bilateral relationship. We can't have stability until Dr. Young is released. We require him to be released as soon as possible, and it is wrongful or arbitrary detention. That phrase of arbitrary detention for Dr. Young that the system used, that our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade used, now, in the last couple of years, we no longer use it, to the extent that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade actually went as far in a Senate estimates hearing to say that they didn't consider anyone, any Australian, arbitrarily detained. That's a problem. And again, in my view, without hearing any different, and yes, understanding that no doubt behind the scenes there's lots of things happening, we still need to provide the Australian public with the truth that cases like Dr. Young are not just consular cases, the equivalent of someone who's been charged with drug peddling or anything like that. This is a case of wrongful detention. It's a problem for the relationship.
Yep. Okay. We've got a couple of other things to push through. I want my 30-second rant quickly on pandas. I don't get pandas. If I go the rest of my life without seeing another panda, I will feel no less satisfied on my deathbed about my life achievement. And I don't understand why anyone over the age of 11 gives a hoot one way or another. So I'm baffled as to why they have become this enormous sort of diplomatic tool at China's disposal. And my plea to all of Australia's journalists and politicians and commentators is that can we please never ever hear about pandas?
Just quickly, I slight news. I like the pandas.
Right. I mean, they're cute. They're lovely animals.
They are, but only if we're able to do those two things at once. If we're only able to say everything economically with China is great, and that I'm visiting the pandas and isn't that great, but I'm unwilling to talk about the security issues, that's when the panda diplomacy and the engagement for engagement's sake becomes a problem.
They don't even want to have sex. Why don't they? just Russia. Now, we've seen a rare bright spot.
Yeah.
We've seen a positive shift from Donald Trump on Russia. He's finally twigged on to the fact that Putin might have been stringing him along, never mind the fact that the bloke who weeds the rose garden probably could have told him that in January. But, okay, it's clear now he's agreed to supply Patriot air defense systems, missiles, ammunition, etc., paid for by NATO allies in Europe. That's fine. That's tolerable, and that's a positive step. Welcome your thoughts on that. My quick thoughts are: one, demonstrates for all of the ridicule that Mark Rutte got around the daddy remarks and those sorts of things in The Hague, and we're speculating a little bit on what exactly has shifted Trump's view here. But I mean, it seems to be pretty strong signs that Rutte had a fair bit to do with that. It shows that with that sort of rather unorthodox diplomacy that we're all forced to go through now, you can actually make a difference to Trump's view. I am a little worried. I mean, obviously, just the fact that it's Trump and he's unpredictable, and we have to hope that he's not going to change his mind. A little worried about the things that he said earlier in the week, where he said, "I'm on nobody's side." I mean, that's clearly a problem. The other one that worries me a little bit is the 50-day deadline that he has set. Now, I mean, it's good to have a deadline, but that feels a little bit one of those risky red lines that if it is breached, then the next time there won't be an opportunity to set another deadline. Welcome your views.
I agree. It does seem a very good shift. The fact that the language is changing, the recognition publicly that Putin really has no interest in negotiating a fair and just peace, that he just really wants to buy himself more time with the aim of really squeezing Ukraine as much as possible, so that whenever there is an endpoint, Russia is clearly the superior party. I think there is a significant shift. You're right, it needs to be a permanent shift. I too don't like the idea that the US doesn't have sides. I think that clearly the US has sides. It's on the side of its allies, it's on the side of its partners, and it's on the side of the rules-based order.
Well, it should be, but that's, I mean, the one of the great problems of the Trump worldview is that is no longer an assured thing.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure that's not assured. I think that would we prefer to see different language? Would we prefer to see friend and foe treated differently, rather than too often friend and foe treated the same, whether it be tariffs or other issues? Yes, but I do think that the too much is put on social media posts. Too much is put on language that isn't ideal. but shouldn't take away from the fact that we have structural alignment in this alliance that continues to be shown, that even after we might not like certain language that President Trump uses around Russia or China or other authoritarian regimes, they do the right thing. And it's, in my view, throughout the last 100 years, it was even one of Churchill's famous quotes around the US will eventually effectively do the right thing after trying as hard as possible not to for as long as possible. We are seeing a continuation of the US enforcing these rules, and that is in our interests. You and I share a view that the Iranian nuclear program was a threat to not just the region but the globe, and that action clearly wasn't isolationist action. It was action to reduce a security threat. Clearly, the US views in relation to China as the pacing threat is one that we share as a national security assessment. And I do think your comment around Mark Rutte and the success of NATO, the recent NATO meeting last month, should be a lesson that we learn here in Australia and elsewhere. That those leaders who are willing to, yes, take a bit of a risk, but willing to engage President Trump and the US administration and willing to have some uncomfortable conversations, that they are actually reaping the benefits because they're also putting themselves in a position to influence President Trump and the administration. And the fact that if we'd been talking leading into NATO and saying, well, are we going to get an uplift of NATO defense spending, and are we going to get President Trump confirming clearly a commitment to NATO in Article 5? I think we said, well, we don't know. But that's what the effort between Secretary General Rutte and President Trump got to. Very, very successful. I think we've got to be willing to have that level of engagement that sometimes involves some uncomfortable conversations, and not be so worried every time we hear some language that we might not like. But it's also, again, goes back to we should be willing to explain to the US where we don't like what they are saying or doing. But we can't also, Dave, be a country that is only willing to speak truth to power in relation to Washington, D.C., if we're not willing to speak truth to power to other capitals like Beijing. So I think your 50-day reference, very important. We do need to ensure that red lines are met. President Putin, right now, he will be looking at what he needs to do to get out of it. He adapts. He has proven himself, as many authoritarian leaders who stay in power for so long, an ability to adapt. That's what he'll be looking to do. We've got to ensure that rather than Putin and Russia squeezing Ukraine and creating division between the US and its NATO partners and other allies, we've got to be the ones who are putting the pressure on Russia so that they're forced to come to the table and not as the stronger party. I think this recent shift in which the US is clearly saying, well, we're not going to be strung along forever and a day is positive.
I'm fascinated to see how Putin is going to try and, the wily bastard that he is, try and pick a way through this next 50 days. I think that this will be a really fascinating test for him. I mean, look, as I think I'm more pessimistic about Trump overall than you might be, and therefore I think the problems are probably more structural than just the sort of the language issues. And while I recognise the work that Rutte has done here, and I recognise that sometimes we're just going to have to do things that feel a bit odd or feel a bit icky or whatever to manage a particular situation as best we can, and just get an outcome that is tolerable, and then over time hopefully we find some kind of stabilized functioning way to deal with what I regard as genuinely a new America. But let's just
quickly on that. I do think that there is we have to be careful that we don't become ourselves fatalist, and we don't so over-dramatise issues. I think the recent conversation this week, another one that we've had this week in Australia, is over Taiwan, and politicians, I think, of both sides have gotten themselves into. They found it challenging to describe what Australia's position is in relation to Taiwan. I think our starting point problem is that we shouldn't only be having that conversation about Taiwan off the back of reports that the US have asked us a question about it. We should be having questions. Sure. We should be having conversations about Taiwan and the South China Sea because it's in Australia's interests. And I'm of the view that the allowing ourselves to simply limit the debate to would Australia automatically commit to a war is the wholly wrong conversation to have. We can't only have no conversation or are we involved in a hot war situation. The problems are there now without a hot war. We're in the middle of hybrid warfare. We've got constant military aggression by China over Taiwan, unprecedented numbers of flyovers. They've got foreign interference, they've got cyber attacks. There's economic coercion, diplomatic coercion. So all that is happening now. Avoiding those conversations might be an easy path for the political class in the short term, but it inevitably means that there's longer term problems because China thinks that it can get away with everything up to the first bullet fired. And effectively, we're creating a situation where we're not explaining to the public why there is a concern. We've got to get out of this message that the only national security threats we have are actual hot wars, because we are effectively creating a situation where we're saying to Beijing, you can almost get what you want without firing a shot because we'll let you push and push and push.
Sure. And no, I think that's all fair. I have no time for what Colby is demanding of Australia and Japan about this future hypothetical scenario. That said, I think Australia would be in a much better position if we more consistently projected the message that we would always stand up for the rules-based order and I mean we say it in the abstract, but we don't say it enough in concrete terms about the way we will actually accept some of that burden. Now,
I agree. I would say that I'm not sure, and I don't know this. I think the problem is I'm not convinced that the Americans have made a demand because I think just as many Australians have said it, the Americans themselves are upfront that they aren't
strategic ambiguity.
They have strategic ambiguity. So again, I think because we're not willing at this stage to be mature enough to have the conversation of what the security threats are that we face, all of a sudden we talk about Taiwan, and I actually think that we've gone down a wrong path here. If the Americans have said, we demand that you lock and load right now on a hot war, well, then that's a problem. But I'm not sure that I've actually seen a demand. If there are requests to talk about, are we strategically aligned, and do we want to work with each other to deter a military intervention by China on Taiwan, then that should be a conversation that we're willing to have. I think in part it's Australia's reticence to even go down that path that means we turn it into one of a sovereignty question of, these are hypothetical questions. Yes, the form of a hot war is a hypothetical question, but Dave, as you know as well as I do, that our Defence Department does wargaming all the time. So it's not as though they don't have these hypothetical questions and are looking at them. But regardless, it falls into the trap of thinking that the conversation over Taiwan is the day after the bullets have been fired. I think the question that Australia and the US and Japan need to have is, what are we doing now about the hybrid warfare that's going on? What are we doing to prevent the war that people want to talk about? So I think that's the problem. And I think if we're being requested to have that conversation, we should be having it. And yes, we should be having it in all sensitivity and classified forms behind the scenes, but we should be talking to the Australian public about it. Just as, frankly, post 9/11, post Bali, we developed a system, the terror threat level, to talk to the Australian public about what the terror threat level is, so that the Australian public always knew every day what the terror threat level is. It's probable at the moment. It can't just be terrorism that we're having that conversation with the public with.
Yeah, okay. Colby could clear it up, to be fair, with by making a public remark to that effect. Now, we were going to talk about the Middle East. We're actually over time, and you're going to be late for a meeting.
Yeah.
Should we pull the pin?
I think if people are happy to have 30-second bursts from me and for you to respond, this week has been busy, and I think it is. Why I wouldn't mind raising is because I think we do have to try and show that as a country, Australia can handle multiple threats simultaneously, because that's the world we live in. We no longer live in a world where we can handle and only have to handle one security threat at a time. So the Middle East again blew up this week with issues between Israel and Syria. Shows that the Middle East is not stable, completely unstable. I do think that, again, part of my view that we need to be having conversations with the public more about the world that currently exists, which is not a stable world, it's not a secure world, goes to this issue that I have. I personally think it's sad that effectively the only reason we're talking about the Druze minority in Syria is because people are getting upset with Israel's military actions in relation to Syria. Effectively, what that is saying is that we'd rather Israel not take military action so that we don't have to worry about what's going on in the Middle East. I think that's a problem. I think the international community needs to be better at saying sectarian violence, whether it's the regime itself or whether it's other groups within Syria that are harming a minority group like the Druze, that should be a problem for us.
Yep.
I think that Israel does have genuine security concerns in relation to an unstable Syria. Israel and the rest of us shouldn't want terrorist groups like Hezbollah being able to rise again by having ungoverned pockets of countries like Syria. We've seen that in the past. And so I do think that we need to, again, have a bit more of a mature conversation and not simply begin a conversation after Israel has taken military action. Here, we have also to have, I think, important to inform our viewers that the current Syrian regime, which has been trying, I think, has been legitimately trying to have stability in Syria, and the US and Israel and the UK and others have been trying to work with the HTS regime, but they were a terrorist organization that took over a very bad regime. I'm very pleased that the Assad regime is gone, but Syria has got to, the new Syrian regime, I think, has got to come to grips with the fact that it is now has control. Do they want to simply be the terrorist entity that took over Syria, or do they want to work with Israel and the US and the UK and others to create stability in Syria, which means that even when they're not the ones, their regime isn't the ones to create the violence against a minority. If sectarian violence is happening, they're responsible for it. Australia still lists the regime as a terrorist group. So when we're talking about Israel's actions against Syria, I think it is important to remember that until Australia delists the HTS, as other countries have done, we're dealing with a terrorist organisation. All these facts need to be better understood. But the aim here needs to be, how do we create the stability within Syria, within the region, that creates safety for all parties?
Yep.
And until we have that, I think it's not. We can't simply say Israel can't take any action to either protect itself or minorities, noting, of course, that the Druze minority, one of the few places that they are protected, is Israel.
Right. Okay. Okay. My quick take on this is that I think al-Sharaa has done enough to earn some trust and credit from the international community, including Israel, for the project he's embarked on. For a former terrorist leader, I think he is. I think he's doing a reasonable job and the best he can to bring together the extremely fractious elements across Syria. It's a very, very tough job that he's got. It seems to me that he miscalculated here by sending government forces into Sueda province at a very, in a very volatile situation. That was misconstrued by the Druze militias, who then overreacted to their presence. There were overreactions on both sides. Israel, of course, then stepped in and, frankly, in my view, overreacted as well. I don't really know why they had to bomb the ministries in Damascus as well as targets in Sueda province. So I think it was very telling that Marco Rubio said that this was a misunderstanding. I think he actually was speaking the truth there. I think they just screwed up on both sides. And what worries me most about it is that it might have set back what appeared to be some fairly constructive and progressive discussions between Israel and Damascus about a non-aggression pact, which partly involves Sueda province as one of the southern provinces that Israel wants to be effectively demilitarized. That is probably a bit too much of a stretch for Damascus, but they're negotiating on that. That's a really, really positive thing. I mean, imagine if Israel and Syria could actually have a non-aggression pact. That would be huge for the region. So that's a real shame.
All very good points. I agree. I think the reality, though, is with the Middle East, it is unstable, and so there are going to be ups and downs.
Sure.
What the region needs to do, what those who care about the region need to do, obviously the US, with such a leadership role, needs to ensure that we can get through those downs and recover from them, with the aim still being that stability. And the Israel-Syria relationship, if it can stabilize, great. As it would be with the Saudis. So I think those aims shouldn't change. But I do think there needs to be I just think there needs to be more of a willingness to understand that simply doing nothing hasn't helped any region.
Sure.
And so, overstepping the mark, you don't want anyone overstepping the mark. But I think that I think too often we don't actually have any conversations until someone does overstep the mark.
Right.
But we've either ignored or we've missed the entire lead up, and that happens. Europe, we've got a hot war in Europe because not enough was done leading into 2022 to deter Putin. We've got complete instability in the Middle East because not enough was done to either deter Iran or its terrorist proxies. And your point about misunderstanding is I think, and Rubio's point, I think Secretary Rubio was right as well. I agree with you. I think that's actually a really important element that we shouldn't just be looking at as mere onlookers. We should say, well, okay, that's interesting. In our region, there is the opportunity for misunderstanding in the South China Sea and other areas. So this is why we've got to do work now. We've got to get out of simply saying after something happens, was that a misunderstanding? Was it a miscalculation? Was it intentional? Far better to try to be in a position to deter the intentional and then be well placed that if there is a misunderstanding to be able to recover as quickly as possible. I think we can all work towards that.
Right, okay. Well, cooler heads prevail, but also forward-thinking heads prevail to create more stable situations for the future. All right, let's wrap it up. I shouldn't have said pull the pin earlier. That was an insensitive metaphor in the context. But anyway, let's wrap it up for today. Thanks, Justin.
Pleasure.
Thanks for watching and listening, folks. We will be back tomorrow with a special episode on one of our recent China investigations. Look out for it on Saturday morning.